The man strapped to the execution gurney looked directly at the young man standing behind the glass and said something that stunned the entire room. His voice cracked. "I'm sorry for taking your mom and your brother." But the young man didn't react. No anger, no tears, nothing. Just silence. Because 12 years earlier, the man apologizing had tried to stab him to death. Before we get into this unbelievable story, take 2 seconds to like the video and subscribe. It might not seem like a big deal, but it actually helps the channel more than you think. And if you're into real stories like this, you're in the right place. On March 11, 2026, Cedric Ricks became the 6th person executed in the United States that year and the 2nd execution carried out in Texas. But the story that led to that moment started more than a decade earlier inside a small apartment in Bedford, Texas. And what happened that night would later be described by prosecutors as a nightmare of pure brutality. It was May 1st, 2013. Cedric Ricks was living with his girlfriend, Roxanne Sanchez, a 30-year-old mother of 2 boys. At some point that evening, the couple started arguing. No one knows exactly what triggered the fight, but witnesses later said the argument escalated quickly. Soon it wasn't just shouting anymore. Ricks allegedly began attacking Roxanne. Her 2 sons were inside the apartment when it happened. Anthony, who was just 8 years old, and Marcus, who was 12. When the boys saw their mother being attacked, they did something incredibly brave. They tried to step in. They tried to protect her. But Cedric Ricks was much bigger and much stronger. He pushed the boys out of the way and continued attacking Roxanne. Then suddenly, the situation became even more terrifying because Ricks walked into the kitchen and he came back holding a knife. And what happened next would change that family forever. According to court records, Ricks began stabbing Roxanne. Marcus, the older brother, tried to run and call the police, but he never made it. Ricks caught him, and then he turned the knife on the 12-year-old boy. Marcus would later tell the court that Ricks held his head down with one hand and stabbed him with the other, over and over and over again. The attack didn't stop there. 8-year-old Anthony was also stabbed during the chaos, and at that point, Marcus believed he was going to die. But what he did next may have saved his life, because Marcus heard something during the attack. He heard the sounds his little brother made right before everything went quiet. So Marcus made a desperate decision. He copied those sounds. He stayed completely still and pretended he was already gone. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, finally, Cedric Ricks stopped. Marcus had survived, but the nightmare was far from over. You might expect someone who just committed a brutal crime to panic and run immediately, but that's not what happened. Instead, investigators say Ricks did something incredibly disturbing. He calmly walked back into the kitchen and put the knife away. Then he took a shower, he packed some clothes, and before leaving the apartment, he checked on his infant son, a 9-month-old baby that he shared with Roxanne. The baby was left unharmed in his crib. Then Cedric Ricks walked out the door as if nothing had happened. Eventually, police tracked him down in Oklahoma, where he was arrested. But the most powerful moment of the entire case was still ahead, because the person who would tell the jury exactly what happened was the boy who survived. During the trial, Marcus took the witness stand. Imagine being a child, sitting in a courtroom just a few feet away from the man who tried to kill you. Marcus told the jury exactly what happened that night. He described how Ricks held his head down while stabbing him repeatedly. He told them about the moment he pretended to be dead. The courtroom reportedly went silent as the jury listened. Prosecutors later described the attack as a nightmarish episode of violence. And even Cedric Ricks admitted something shocking while testifying. He told the jury that he wished he could undo what happened. But he also said something else. He said he had tried several times to end his own life afterward, but failed. Despite his testimony, the evidence was overwhelming.
After a 2-week trial, the jury found Cedric Ricks guilty of capital murder, and he was sentenced to death. But as investigators dug deeper into his past, an unsettling pattern began to appear. The trial revealed that the attack on Roxanne Sanchez wasn't the first time Ricks had been accused of violence. His former wife testified in court that during their relationship, Ricks had attacked her multiple times. In one incident, she said he beat and choked her until bystanders intervened. Even more troubling, just months before the murders, Roxanne Sanchez had filed for an emergency protective order against him. Reports claimed he had assaulted her and even been rough with their baby. But that protective order eventually expired. 4 months later, Roxanne and her 8-year-old son were gone. And the case slowly worked its way through the appeals process for years, until finally the execution date was set. Ricks's attorneys made one last attempt to stop the execution. They argued that prosecutors had improperly removed jurors based on race during the original trial. The case was sent to the U.S. Supreme Court, but the court declined to intervene. That meant the execution would move forward. On March 11, 2026, Cedric Ricks was brought into the execution chamber in Texas. 7 members of Roxanne Sanchez's family were there to witness it, including Marcus, now 25 years old, the same boy who survived the stabbing attack. Witnesses said the scars from that night were still visible on the back of his neck. As Ricks lay strapped to the gurney, he turned toward the viewing room and began speaking. His voice shook. He apologized for taking Roxanne and Anthony away from their family. He spoke directly to Marcus. He said he had always thought about him and that he was sorry for the pain he caused. He said he hoped one day they could find forgiveness so they wouldn't have to live with that pain forever. But none of the family members responded. They showed no visible emotion. Moments later, the lethal drugs were administered. At 6:55 p.m., Cedric Ricks was pronounced dead. More than a decade earlier, Marcus survived something almost unimaginable. He witnessed the loss of his mother and his little brother. He survived multiple stab wounds, and years later, he testified in court and helped ensure justice was served. Then he stood just feet away as the man responsible for that night took his final breath. And in the end, the story of Cedric Ricks may be remembered for the violence that happened in that apartment, but it will also be remembered for something else: the courage of a 12-year-old boy who survived by pretending to be dead and lived long enough to tell the truth.